Welcome to the ReReview podcast, where we watch movies from our past with a perspective from today. Your hosts are Matt, Bobby, and Austin, and we have an immense love for the films of our youth, so we're taking a look back to see if they still hold up. On this episode, we are discussing The Mask, released in 1994, directed by Chuck Russell, starring Jim Carrey, Cameron Diaz, and Peter Riegert. This movie tells the story of a wild and crazy superhero. Now, this is a fair warning. We're spoiling a 27-year-old movie, so if you haven't seen it, we'll be revealing key plot points. This is my choice, so I'll open our discussion this week. It's interesting watching, this movie from the 90s and almost kind of buying into what I'm going to call is full-on nostalgia for my youth. Usually we're watching these films and I may not attach to it as much. Well, Jurassic Park, but that's a different thing. But for this movie, it just reminded me of a lot of joy of the silliness of Jim Carrey. And I think also connecting to the fact that there were jokes that the younger me just outright missed, having been a very long time since I've seen this film. But I was beyond entertained and kind of smiling with that childlike joy for the shenanigans. And I feel having such a bombastic hero, let me put that in quotes, and really not feeling like I've seen a movie that was set up like this in a very long time, sort of both campy and cheesy, while also leaning very, very hard on its love for animation. And showing all those things that the character, the Mask, ends up being throughout the film. I found it, very, very fun to watch, and I was afraid of this one. Not gonna lie, a lot of the older movies, especially comedies, I feel don't necessarily hold up, especially the way jokes go. And this one still felt like something I would happily let if I had a teenager, if my teenager watch it, and we can laugh and kind of enjoy it. So we'll get into some more details in a bit. But Matt, how'd you feel about it?
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, to be honest, I kind of went into it expecting a lot of the stuff not to hold up, either from a PC point of view or even a cringe factor. There was some stuff every once in a while. I'm guessing it's probably more of the ad-lib stuff that was occurring in the movie, but for the most part, I think that it held up, really well. I mean, I laughed quite a bit. At the very least, I chuckled in quite a few of the scenes that I think I was meant to. The plot was fairly simple and straightforward, but carried on pretty well. I didn't feel like it dragged at any particular point, and I definitely feel that my nostalgia factor was pretty high on this. I watched it, probably not in theaters. I don't think I watched this in theaters. This was definitely a VHS watch. I haven't seen it in a long time. I know I watched the Mask cartoon show as a kid. I probably would have been, maybe 12 or 13 when this movie came out, maybe around there. So I was definitely into The Mask. I definitely think that there, like you said, there was a lot of adult humor I definitely missed as a kid watching this movie that I totally caught this time.
But also feels kind of tame in a way for today's content. But so it's actually nice.
Oh, for sure. I definitely feel like if this were, produced today, it would definitely be a lot more on the raunchier side rather than, you could definitely feel the, the Looney Tunes, Merry Melodies, Tex Avery, flavor in this. They, especially compared to the comic book, as graphic and as extreme as the comic book could be, this is definitely a lot more, I'm not going to say PG, but a lot more, tame in comparison without it being, childish. I do think that peppering in those adult humor moments or whatever definitely keeps it from getting a little bit too goofy, right?
Mm-hmm. Bobby?
I mean, I definitely, you talk about the nostalgia factor of it, and I fell right into that. I mean, I really enjoyed a lot of that, and I like how you mentioned the Tex Avery stuff, and I think that's part of the reason why I liked it so much is it really leaned heavily into some of that. Like, there's obviously like getting, or in my mind, getting influences from like Roger Rabbit with the like wisecrack humor, and obviously like the Tasmanian Devil, and for sure like Pepe Le Pew with his like falling in love with the girl, kind of like over the top, like hopeless romantic as they called it in the movie, and like the like the wolf character and all that kind of stuff. But I really enjoyed like the kind of like animated kind of aspect to it, and even the fact that it was a completely made up location. What did they call it? Like Edge something, the city of the Edge or something, and how there was all these interesting parks like landfill park and the even the club, like reminded me of some kind of movie in the 50s, although I think it's based on maybe it's based on a real club that's called the Coco Bongo in Cancun, I think. But it's still like, like it has a very interesting like Art Deco style, and even like some of the like the backgrounds that are like map paintings and mixtures of various other cities, and on top of the scene with the methane gas. I thought that all that kind of stuff was very artfully done, and the production with the Art Deco work I thought was just really fun to look at, and on top of it being like well paced and fast moving.
Because they borrowed so much from these WB characters. I mean, I thought it was neat looking at his setup in the apartment, and he's got the Taz pillow, the Daffy and Porky Pig photos. I think it was above his bed, sort of the nods in the film. The character herself definitely acted especially like Taz. You think they needed sign off for anything to mimic the characters like this?
I don't know. I mean, maybe it wasn't. It didn't delve so deep into it that I feel like there probably was some sign off, but they're probably, especially considering the take on it, because I know if I remember correctly during the production of this movie, because like I said before, the comic is a lot more violent and graphic. I know during the production there was a lot more of that aspect. I mean, especially considering this is a New Line Cinema movie. They are the horror kings, right? Like they're the ones who are known for bringing Scream and Freddy Krueger and all those to the mainstream or whatever. And I think there was even a version of this, if I'm not mistaken, before the director Chuck Russell came on, where it was going to be about a mask maker who like took off faces or something and like put them on teens to turn them into zombies or something.
Oh, this is interesting.
Like, I think the whole concept of this movie originally was to become a horror franchise for New Line Cinema, and then Chuck Russell came on and just didn't like any of that and just went the complete 180 to the cartoon aspect of it. So I think that the fact that it was a lot more faithful and a lot more of a fan letter, love letter to those kind of movies, that I don't think that you would really see much of a complaint from the rights owners to maybe not have them. It's not like Roger Rabbit, right, where you're going to have the characters actually interacting. It's just kind of like on pillows and posters. And I think there was even like a Looney Tunes like magazine or something in his drawer or whatever. So like they're just like little nods. They probably just had to get like basic sign offs for it. So.
Well, I mean, looking at it from the outside, I mean, it does seem like what this movie did really well was just look at what talent they had in front of them, like Jim Carrey, and then looking at introducing Cameron Diaz and some other people, and just looking at what they had in front of them and saying, okay, it's not going to make sense to do anything else with Jim Carrey. Let's just lean into what he does.
Whoa.
And make it work.
I kind of feel like, but it could only exist because of Jim Carrey. Like, there's no way you'd bring Jim Carrey on and not go this direction. I mean, this was the same year that he did Dumb and Dumber and Ace Ventura, right? So,
yeah,
there's just no way. Now, granted, they hadn't seen it, but I'm sure in Hollywood, everyone's seeing him, and of course, from In Living Color or whatever, like you don't get this guy and have him be a serial killer. Though I guess that would kind of work too in a way, right? Like if you had Jim Carrey be, this could have, and there were some moments, right? They could, especially in Landfill Park, that could have totally been like a Forensic Files episode right there, right?
They didn't know yet that Jim would eventually turn into Eternal Sunshine Jim.
This is true. This is totally true.
Yeah,
But
they expected him to have only the comedy chops.
you totally couldn't do this movie without him. This is 100% Jim Carrey and everything that he brings to his improv. Like you could, if you remove Jim Carrey, you just couldn't do this. And I mean, the sequel kind of shows why you need Jim Carrey in this role to make it work, right?
Mm-hmm. It just would have been a very different movie.
Have either of you seen the sequel?
Unfortunately. I tried. I got maybe 20 minutes in, and no offense to Jamie Kennedy, but man, that movie. And to be fair, I'm not going to get too deep into it, but it just the movie didn't know what it wanted to be. Unlike this one, this one clearly had a clear concept of what it wanted to be, and yeah, it's shallow, right? This is not a deep,
But I don't mind that. I think that
for sure.
Things are kind of what I enjoyed. Like you said, the plot isn't some extravagant, convoluted. It's just like, this is really easy and simple. He's kind of unhappy. This thing makes him wake himself up.
It's a superhero movie through and through.
Ben Stein is like, hey, you're both you and the mask, and it's great.
Oh, he could have been Alfred. Come on, he should have been like a character throughout all this.
Actually, that would have been pretty awesome if he was, considering they opened with him on the TV. If he was a little more weight in the movie, would have been fantastic. In fact, how did Jim even get to consult with him?
How did he get in that office?
How did he get into that office to even have a meeting with him to have like a therapist meeting?
He paid a lot of money from a stolen bank heist.
Yeah, it's hard, like you said, to even remove Jim Carrey from the character and actually call him Stanley Ipkiss. Like it's like, this is Jim Carrey's movie. It's really hard not to see it another way. But like you mentioned, Bobby, I think it was even seeing Cameron Diaz, her entrance into the film. You're like, oh, hey, what's going on here? And it's like, wow, this is pretty cool. But I was kind of excited to see Redfoot. You all knew it.
Peter Green. Yeah,
he's great.
And he leaned into it too. I mean, there were some moments, especially like during the gunshot death scene. He was playing up that fourth wall pretty well, actually. Like, and I get it. Like, he definitely played the '90s bad guy in this through and through, right? Like, it's not anything that's revolutionary, but he kind of leaned in and kind of had that aspect to it, right?
He's almost too good at that character, because when he kind of leaned into that scene where he was looking like he was gonna like wife beat Cameron Diaz a little bit, I was like, oh man, I'm kind of buying this a little more than I should. I think like this is making me a little bit nervous watching this scene.
Well, especially in that shot, because they got him real close to his face. I just again remember because all the bokeh around him. But yes, he was very aggressive, and it was very frightening at that moment.
But I mean, good for him on the acting. I thought, I really bought that character at that time.
Was everyone smoking in the 90s as much as they were in this film?
I mean, I believe you were allowed to smoke wasn't Pulp Fiction, who has the exact same guy as Zed, like they're smoking in cafes in that movie too. So yeah, I think indoor smoking was still allowed in a lot of places then.
I felt like I was definitely still being marketed to. You see it and you're like, oh man, smoking does look really, really cool on film.
Well, and I mean, it definitely is. I think that Bobby even kind of brought up when we were watching it, the Art Deco aspect of it. It's trying to create that that blend of modern and old, and so it definitely kind of had a Art Deco noir aspect to it, not only in its design but in its characters. And I think that concept of smoking in the movie kind of played into it. Even, the types of guns being used and stuff like that. I mean, pulling out a Tommy gun and I think there was even, towards the end, he was wearing the straight up pinstripe gangster outfit,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I definitely was having because I think it was in the late 90s when swing was back in. And everyone was kind of enjoying that stuff. And
zoot suit.
Yeah, the full zoot suit brought me into all that, thinking of Dick Tracy.
Although, like he only wore the like yellow zoot suit, like he was hardly in it.
It looked so good, though,
right? I pictured it being in the entire movie, but
it was a felt hat. Basically, I'm lining up my Halloween costume already. Leave me alone.
Okay, all right. So I guess going in that direction, obviously the costumes, they went in that direction. What did you think about the actual mask itself? Like with the makeup and stuff. How did you feel about that? The look of it.
I think the mask itself looks good. The most challenging thing is sort of how they handled the CGI for that time. I think I'm more forgiving because of its cartoony nature, but there's if you want to get full nerd into looking at the appearance and how things were, it could be better. It definitely could, especially things felt out of place in certain parts. I noticed immediately when near the end when the dog was wearing the mask and he's biting the henchman's pants, his trousers, and it just isn't there. It doesn't even look like it's there. But I'm way more forgiving, just I guess, giving the tone of the film to let it go. But from the prosthetic standpoint, Jim's not an issue. I don't know how I would make that for like a cosplay. Looks like it'd be a lot of work, or it might be uncomfortable to wear for a long time. But for Redfoot's mask, he looked like the precursor to Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the TV show.
It's funny because like I remember thinking this when I watched it a long time ago, and watching it again, I kind of took a look into it as well. But I remember thinking his mask, was it Dorian? The mask that he had, like the bone structure and everything, it was fine, but it really looked like they had taken a Sharpie to draw like the shadow marks on it. And so it didn't quite look right to me.
Oh, they totally did. You're absolutely right about that. One of the things I just decided to ignore because I was like,
his mat, and they did it a couple times where they had this like really strong, pronounced lighting on him, where it was like either like a bright red, which really played into like the dramatics of it and like just made it really contrasty. And I think it was really it really like worked in that kind of setup. But I do want to mention the effects, and I think that for at the time I remember thinking they were really good, and like really enjoyed a lot of it. I mean, obviously like they did a whole lot of like of when he pulls off the mask, like there's all sorts of atmospheric effects going on, and it's just a really big deal every time the mask goes on and goes off. And there's all these effects of like the mask warping around his head and grabbing his face, and even when he pulls it off, it like pulls pieces of his face off with the mask. So it's very dramatic going on and off. But the interesting thing about that too is that you could tell like when they're like, okay, we don't want to do the whole like thing with taking on and off the mask, so they like
cut away and had some flashing lights.
Cut
limousine scene.
Cut away. But I mean, like it does make sense to not just do the whole thing every single time.
Yeah, and there's the budgetary aspect of it, right? I mean, I know ILM was the major contributor to the visual effects in this, and I'm sure that a huge chunk of the reason why they did that, just I from a budgetary point of view, but also from a repetition, right? Do you really need to see it every single time? In order to really be sold on it. So, I'm fine with it. I'm sure there's probably like a lot of stuff that probably did get cut. I'm sure there's probably a lot of deleted scenes that they just didn't follow through on just because like, does this really add to the story, right?
Yeah. And Austin, to your point too, I think that the tone of it really plays a lot towards what they were able to do in terms of like just breaking the reality of everything, just making everything like cartoon world. And it's like, okay, like thinking like, okay, like what does this mask control and what doesn't it? Like at some point he's able to, it seems like, control an entire fleet of police and make them dance and, like mind manipulate them like WandaVision or whatever. And then like when he says, okay, like let's flush the fountain, it's like to pulling that whole into reality, just like like Roger Rabbit, where they're like painting on tunnels and going through, or other kinds of films like that.
Which I mean, that could lead into talking about, because those are really sort of the gags, the little bits that they threw in to get us to laugh. So wondering how you both felt about the comedy. I have some specific scenes that I liked, I'll mention in a second, but Bobby, how'd you feel just about the comedy in general?
I thought most of it was pretty entertaining. I mean, some of it I felt like was probably a little bit over the top. I mean, and I think maybe it was intended that way, but I think some of it kind of went a little long and didn't hit as much for me. But I mean, I still enjoyed and was entertained, even though I maybe didn't have so many laugh out loud moments.
Yeah.
I'd agree with that. I think that the gags in general, I think, worked for the most part. I think that Jim Carrey is an acquired taste. I think that
That's a good way of putting it.
sometimes, he hits that 10, but sometimes he hits the 11, and I think it goes a little bit too much, especially on some of his. I think it was towards the end where I felt like it was going a little bit too catchphrasy, considering the situation, I guess. But I think that overall the humor worked really well. I have to bring this up. I mean, Milo. I mean, all the stuff with Milo.
Milo was great.
I literally wrote down that he is the top billed cast member of this whole film. Milo is the best thing of this entire film,
without a doubt. I mean, that dog was just amazing. As far as I think there's even a couple of moments where he does like double takes at the camera. I mean, he keeps the eye contact with the guy. I mean, he's acting. This dog is acting in the movie. It's not like he's just there, and it terrifies me because if you ever made this movie now, that dog would probably be CGI.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah. It's very difficult to work with animals in movies. I'll give you an anecdote on a movie that I worked on that I helped out with production. There was a dog that was dying in our movie, spoiler alert, and it was a very emotional scene. The actress had to cry over this dog. And so sitting there in production, it's very different than what you see in the movie because this girl is trying to cry. And right behind the camera is the trainer constantly nonstop shouting, not shouting, but saying commands to the dog. Head down, head down. Okay, Fido down, head down, nonstop. And it's like this actress is having to cry, and the dog would like pop his head up just a little bit, and everybody behind the camera be like, oh, dog, down, and then the dog would like go down again. It's like head down. It's very difficult to work with animals. So I mean, I think they did a really great job with.
Yeah, it does seem to stand out a little bit because I feel like even with other live action movies, this dog was this handler. They were on cue. Like everything felt really, really good about the way the dog was operating in the scenes. And I mean, I loved one of the first early gags with just him being in the dream with Cameron Diaz, and then he's getting his ear licked just as they switch. She starts licking his ear, but it's really the dog that's like. I was just like, this is friggin' fantastic.
I want to just kind of switch gears here and kind of talk about the use of guns and all the shooting scenes in this movie. It was like there were, I don't know how many bullets shot in this movie and how many things actually hit.
I mean, leading into that, we can get to the most serious part. It still seemed like the movie was a pretty big indictment on police forces. They were not kind to the police forces at all.
If you look at the timeline of this movie, it's 94, which is only 2 years after the Rodney King thing, and the camera, and they seem to clearly mention that in the movie.
I think we all reacted to that.
Where's my camcorder?
Heavy. Yeah, they're searching through Jim Carrey, getting all the stuff out. Sorry, Stanley Ipkiss. I say I'm going to call him Jim, and searching to get stuff out of the mask's pockets, and he just makes that comment about where's my camcorder, and it was heavy.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of. I mean, it's easy to notice now when the first time you see a police officer in these films. They have a gun in their hand and it's drawn, and they're running into a crowded room or a place where, by the plot, they have no idea who they're running into. You just assume that they're going to start unloading on the bad guys. But in a lot of cases, maybe it's just like some factory workers, and there's a lot of scenes of just a lot of gunfire in this, and I mean, I don't know if it's played for comedy's sake, but I mean, I thought that, and some of it is very specifically played for comedy, the shooting.
No, there
But
was definitely an extra level to it. I mean, you heard me react how shocked I was when it was the bank robbing scene. The mask comes out, he's got all the money. The cops show up, and they haven't even really turned the corner, and the bad guys just start shooting at them. And I lost it. I was like, wait, I don't understand. Like, your van's there. This is supposed to start a chase scene, not just you're going to go shoot everyone. And then the next scene it cuts to is they're all back at the bar. It's like, wait, what just happened? How did everyone get away?
So I want to ask you guys a question. And it's a hypothetical, I suppose, but in 2021, if you were to make a Mask movie, not a reboot, I don't like the idea of reboots, but an extension of the Mask, not Stanley Ipkiss, it's a new character or whatever, who would you cast? Could anyone pull it off? Because obviously there was a sequel and they had a comedian, and I feel like the problem was they tried to get Jamie Kennedy to be Jim Carrey, and it didn't work whatsoever. But who would you cast to be the Mask today? Is there a comedian that has maybe not the manic energy of Jim Carrey, but could be this outlandish character?
in my mind, you have to do something completely different. You have to find a comedian who is completely different and not try to mimic this bombastic kind of Tex Avery kind of situation, because in my mind, it will only pale in comparison or naturally be compared to it and just come up short. So in my mind, the only way to do it is to just maybe not go 180, but at least go different enough to where it's like, okay, this is a different take on it.
Wait, so do you want the serious violent take that Matt referenced?
No, I mean, I don't think serious violent as much as just. I mean, it's a tough thing to do, because I mean, it just like he made the role so. I mean, when you think of the Mask, you think of him, and to just put somebody else in it, it's automatically compared to him. So, and because of that, you just have to go totally different. And I'm not sure if I'm not sure what that looks like, but
let me help the question further, because I have someone. Imagine Jim didn't do it. Who from today would you put in the role?
I have a person in mind. I don't know if it would work. And again, it's only because I might be comparing, and it's probably out there, but I could kind of see Kevin Hart.
Huh.
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah.
Huh.
I think that's good.
Yeah.
And I could totally see it happen. And with his style of comedy, it probably wouldn't be like leaning into cartoons as much. It would have to be like maybe leaning into something else, like maybe like a bigger personality of him, like maybe he plays like a shy type of guy, and then as soon as he puts the mask on, he's the big kind of guy. I mean, they've done this kind of thing before, like in the Nutty Professor with Eddie Murphy, where he was like, the big fat guy, but then he takes this like potion and becomes like the skinny guy, and now he's like the big. So it's kind of like a take on the same type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I thought of it probably is too similar in a weird way. Steve Carell. Crickets. You're like,
he's. I don't know. It's weird because like he's such a subtle, awkward kind of humor, I guess, and maybe it's just because I see him in The Office. Maybe, like, I mean, obviously he's done a lot of stuff in a little bit more on the dramatic side.
I've imagined him being in the office and getting access to the mask while still being the boss in the office.
So here goes something that I was thinking of when I was watching the movie. Maybe it would even play into a potential extension movie, whatever, that is in this theoretical situation. But they never really played into the aspect of the Mask and Stanley Ipkiss being two separate entities.
Yeah.
It was an extension of Stanley Ipkiss. I almost could imagine, like, the Nutty Professor, right, where it was almost a Mr. Hyde and Dr. Jekyll situation, right? Where maybe Stanley wasn't even aware of what the Mask was doing. He just woke up the next day, and maybe he didn't have control because and I don't, maybe that was an aspect that you didn't really want to get into in this movie, but it could have made it a lot more interesting, especially if you did want to kind of not lean into the zaniness of as much because you didn't want it to be comparable. Just the idea of somebody who, is kind of released, whenever they put the mask on, but then it almost becomes a burden. And maybe that plays into the superhero aspect where they don't want to put the mask on, but they have to in order to save someone or to save the city or whatever the scenario is, where it's a terrible burden, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting because as a plot device, and they definitely use it in this movie where the mask is like ultimately very transferable, right? Like, so it's not like the main hero owns this entity and it's just his. Like, Superman is Superman and no one can take that from him unless they have, kryptonite or whatever. But it's not like they then become Superman. I mean, the interesting thing about the mask is that it's transferable and whoever wears it just like, so it's like, it's an interesting kind of scenario where, like it can be a great asset for one person and then all of a sudden become their own worst nightmare.
It seems like the kind of thing you'd want to destroy as quickly as possible.
Right, exactly. because it can fall into the wrong hands.
Yep.
It needs to be destroyed and not just thrown into the same river that it was found.
So I think we'll get to the part now. Bobby, recommendation. Someone asked you today, should I watch The Mask? What do you have to say?
I would say yes. I mean, I was pretty entertained by it. I mean, again, I really liked the look of it. I thought that it was pretty creative. I mean, is it the most perfect movie you could ever watch? No, but I mean, I would absolutely recommend it for a watch.
Matt?
I would recommend it. I would probably add the caveat, are you a fan of Jim Carrey? If they say yes, then I'll say go for it. If they say no, I'll be like, give the trailer a watch, or maybe I'll give you a little description of what it's like, and then you can jump into it. If not, then maybe it's a pass for you.
Yeah, that's good. I'm a fan of Jim Carrey, so this is definitely I'll recommend this one. I thought it was a lot of fun, and again, very happily surprised. One of these ones that I think has been many years on the shelf and haven't seen, and it still holds up for me today. So, as always, thank you for listening, and remember to always look for the BBD, the bigger, better deal.